I watched 2 documentaries on the Mamas and the Papas, and they didn't line up. There is so much misinformation about this band that it took me over 100 hours to compile this script, and I can almost guarantee that there is still something wrong in it. Even the band members themselves tell the story in different ways, and as you'll see, there's a point in this story when Cass curses out John Phillips for telling her that she is telling her own story wrong. That being said, today I'm telling a crazy story of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I spit the facts quickly, and I give information on every album while throwing in a bit of my opinion, so get ready for a thorough video, sit down, relax, click the like button, and enjoy the story of the Mamas and the Papas.
He's got a real cute cat and he's talking about some random man is George Music Hunt.
Singer, songwriter, and guitarist John Phillips was born August 30th, 1935 in South Carolina, though he grew up in Alexandria, Virginia. He attended military school as a child, and in high school formed several bands and had a good ear for doo-wop harmonies, and would distribute singing parts to his friends. He got married to Susan Adams in 1957, and had attempted college for a short time, but eventually decided to take music seriously after creating a group called The Abstracts, which included his friend Scott McKenzie. They moved to New York and changed their name to The Smoothies. John wrote the songs, and they had a fair amount of success, releasing 2 singles in 1960 on Decca Records and appearing on the TV show American Bandstand. But times were changing, and if John was going to be doing music full-time, he would have to leave doo-wop behind. He and Scott McKenzie would meet banjo player Dick Wiseman, and they would start a folk trio called the Journeymen at the beginning of 1961. Things moved quickly for this band. They worked with Frank Werber, who managed the Kingston Trio, and got them signed to Capitol Records. After recording their first album, John and his family would move to San Francisco, where the band got a residency playing at a club called the Hungry Eye. This is where John would meet Michelle Gilliam in July of 1961. Holly Michelle Gilliam was born June 4th, 1944 in Long Beach, California. Her mother passed away when she was just 5 years old, and she was further strengthened by spending 6 years living in Mexico. At 13, she moved back to Los Angeles, and in her high school years, she played sports and studied instruments like piano, guitar, and cello. In 1961, she moved to San Francisco to live with her friend Tamar Hoddle and worked as a model. The two of them would go to the Hungry Eye and see the Journeymen perform one night in July. Her friend started dating Scott McKenzie, and soon the married man John was worn down by the advances of the pretty young model, and the two got married a year and a half later on December 31st of 1962. Michelle had moved along with the group back east and experienced her first snowy winter in New York. After expressing her desire for the warmth of California, the inspiration for California Dreamin' came to John Phillips late one night. He struggled to wake up Michelle and convince her to help write the song, but eventually she got up, and of course she never regretted working on what would become their breakthrough hit. After recording a live album and a second studio album, the Journeymen began to lose steam. They stayed afloat writing jingles for a time, but ultimately broke up in 1964. In order to fulfill contractual obligations, John formed a new version of the band called the New Journeymen. He brought in his wife Michelle, so that way they could bring home double the pay. Banjo player Marshall Brickman was with them for a short time, but ultimately a strong-voiced tenor named Denny Doherty would round out the trio. Dennis Gerard Stephen Doherty was born on November 29, 1940 in Halifax, Nova Scotia in Canada. As a teenager, he formed a rock band with his friends called the Hepsters that were together for a couple of years in the mid-late 50s. But as John Phillips had, Denny took inspiration from the Kingston Trio for the lineup of his next group, the Colonials, formed at a New Year's Eve party in 1960 with Richard Byrne and Patrick Lacroix. They did well for themselves in Canada during 1961, and in 1962 they signed with Epic Records in New York and changed their name to the Halifax 3. They recorded 2 albums in 1963, toured North America, and performed on national TV. Their most successful single was a humorous song called The Man Who Wouldn't Sing Along with Mitch, which of course refers to Mitch Miller's numerous Sing Along with Mitch albums. With Zal Yanofsky joining as a guest musician, the group had toured alongside the Journeymen in 1963, and Denny had become friends with John and Michelle. The Halifax 3 had relocated to California, and despite all their efforts, their albums just weren't selling well enough, and they ended up breaking up in 1964. Denny and Zalyanovsky would stick together, and they joined a band called the Mugwumps. This brings us to Ellen Naomi Cohen, who was born September 19th in 1941 in Baltimore, Maryland. She and her family had lived in Alexandria, Virginia for most of her childhood, but they moved around quite a bit, and she was back in Baltimore when she was 15. She started going by Cass and began seriously singing and acting near the end of her high school years and performed in a summer play. Once out of high school, she moved to New York and got a spot on a touring performance of The Music Man in 1962. After her short stint in college, her and Tim Rose started a band called the Triumvirate. They changed their name to the Big Three after John Brown was replaced by James Hendricks, not to be confused with this one. In order to prevent him from being drafted into the Vietnam War, Cass married her bandmate in 1963. It is said that the marriage was never consummated, and it was annulled in 1968. The Big Three recorded 2 albums and made a total of 26 appearances on TV before the band split up and Tim Rose went solo. If you're really into Cass Elliot, you should really check out some of this stuff, especially songs like Nora's Dove and Young Girl's Lament. The Big Three's first album contained the Banjo Song, a fresh melody that reused the lyrics of Oh Susanna, but later, Dutch rock band Shocking Blue would write new lyrics over this melody for their hit song Venus. On the night that Cass and Denny met each other, they instantly got along, cracking jokes and showing admiration for each other's vocal abilities. They joked about who was going to drink the other under the table, and they decided, why waste time? Let's just get under the table and start drinking now. Cass fell in love with Denny, but unfortunately he never took her advances seriously. Cass and James replaced Tim Rose with the Canadians Zalyanovsky and Denny Doherty, and they formed a folk rock group called the Mugwumps. This group only released 1 single before disbanding, though they had recorded an album worth of material in August of 1964, which would eventually be released in 1967. John Sebastian had briefly been a member of the Mugwumps, and he and Zalyanovsky formed the Lovin' Spoonful. James Hendricks moved to Los Angeles and formed a band called The Lamp of Childhood. In 1965, Marshall Brickman left the new Journeymen, and John Phillips contacted Denny Doherty to take his place. Soon there would be a night in New York when Michelle would open the door to Denny's friend Cass Elliot. It was her and John's first time meeting the unforgettable woman, and the 4 of them would take LSD together and become very close. Denny would introduce John to the Beatles, and would begin the work of convincing him that folk music was going to be left behind, and that they were going to have to take inspiration from the new sounds and the creative songwriting coming from the Beatles if they were going to stay relevant. Denny, of course, also suggested that his incredibly talented friend Cass Elliot join the band, but John Phillips was reluctant for a few reasons. He claimed that her voice and image weren't right for the band, and if that he were going to include another band member, it was going to be a woman with a higher-pitched voice than Cass could reach. Though, of course, Cass and others would likely argue that it was all about the image. The 3 members of the new Journeymen decided to take a long vacation and craft their music in a more pleasant setting, and they chose a random spot on the map. Along with some friends and family, they arrived on St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands, and they lived extremely cheaply in tents on the beach. They met a guy named Duffy who owned a motel with bars and a discotheque, and John negotiated for some usage of the hotel and performed there with Michelle and Denny. Wanting to follow Denny, Cass would arrive a couple months after the others with a vial of LSD, which she would use when introducing herself to people, as well as to wake up her friends every morning. Cass would sing along during the band's rehearsals, whether John wanted her to or not, and eventually got a job as a waitress at Duffy's place. But as she worked and the band performed, her focus was on performing the harmonies and showing that she could get just as big of an applause as the band performing on stage. One day, a pipe would fall and hit her on the head and caused a minor concussion. Legend has it that afterwards, she was able to achieve a wider vocal range. During their time on the beach, Michelle and Denny began to grow closer and eventually led to a kiss and some obvious flirtation in front of the others. Michelle would tell John about the kiss, and he was obviously upset, but not nearly as devastated as Cass was by the whole situation. She felt her friend Michelle could have any man that she wanted, and felt extremely betrayed that Michelle could go for the same man that Cass wanted, even while married to another man. It's possible that John and Cass weren't aware at this time just how serious Denny and Michelle were getting, but I've heard the story told both ways, and if you appreciate all the work that I went through trying to sort out all the misinformation, please give me a like below. That's all I'm asking for you. I really appreciate it. While you're there, of course, you can smash the subscribe button and click the bell icon so that way you get notified when I release a video. John's credit card that they had been living off of was finally cut off, and so it was time to get off the islands. Cass fortunately had a return ticket, but the other three ended up taking a boat to Puerto Rico, where they would use their last $50 on a gamble on a craps table, where Michelle was able to win them enough money to fly first class back to New York. They didn't stay long though, and they were actually paid to drive a limo across the country to Los Angeles. When they got there, they had a couple of extra days to use the car, and would eventually meet up with Cass. For a time, the four of them lived extremely cheaply together in a one-bedroom apartment, and it was here that John would start to warm up to Cass. Cass got in touch with her friend Barry McGuire, who had recently made it to #1 on the charts with his version of Eve of Destruction. Written by P.F. Sloan, produced by Lou Adler, and released in July of 1965. Barry was able to get his friends an audition with Lou Adler from Dunhill Records, and with John on a 12-string guitar, the band under the name The Magic Circle performed several songs for the producer. It seems Cass officially joined the band when the four of them signed a contract with Dunhill Records, and they were set up with a house, a car, and accounts to buy hip clothing. While mentioning clothes, I wanted to squeeze in the fact that this band looked opposite of all the others that people were used to seeing at the time. While most bands were dressing like the Beatles, or similarly uniform, and almost always consisted of either all male or female singers, the Magic Circle wore clothes that any youth in the 60s could relate to, had an equal mix of men and women, and of course, the Proud Mama Cass became an icon and inspiration to anyone who might not fit in with stereotypical beauty standards. Lou Adler wanted his proven success Barry McGuire to sing the lead vocals, while the others performed backing vocals. They actually recorded California Dreamin' this way, but the song didn't have the same magic. The original California Dreamin' was released on Barry's 1966 album This Precious Time, among several other tracks that featured backing vocals by the Magic Circle. While watching TV, the Hells Angels biker gang mentioned that they refer to their women as mamas, and Cass's response to this led to the band adopting the name The Mamas and the Papas. The first single by the Mamas and the Papas was Go Where You Wanna Go, and they sent 5,000 test copies to Hawaii, but they quickly shifted gears and decided to go with California Dreamin' as the band's first nationally released single in September of 1965. They mostly deleted Barry McGuire's vocals and harmonica solo, and recorded Denny's lead vocal track and a flute solo. At the very beginning of the actual Mamas and the Papas track, you can still hear Barry in the left channel at the very first line, and if you listen extremely closely, you can catch glimpses of the harmonica solo during the flute solo. Dunhill successfully promoted the single, and it climbed to #4 in the US and did extremely well in other countries as well. The Mamas and the Papas were a hit, and the money started flowing in for these four broke musicians. The band's debut full-length album, If You Can Believe Your Eyes and Ears, was released in February of 1966 and would make it to #1 on the Billboard charts. Lou Adler was a major player in the creation of this excellent album that is focused on the incredible harmonies with instrumentation based off of styles that were growing in popularity, including sunshine pop, folk rock, and psychedelic pop. It begins with the Grammy-winning Monday Monday, a song that Denny and Michelle had initially been opposed to as they didn't really understand it. But it would be the group's only single to make it to #1, and Denny and Mitchie, along with millions of other people, have grown to love it very dearly over the years. As someone that doesn't typically seek out cover songs, I would like to say that I listen to the Mamas and Papas entirely for the songs that John Phillips wrote. But at least on this album, the covers are all so unique and wonderful that each one is worth mentioning. Especially I Call Your Name, which you have to be pretty familiar with the Beatles to recognize that this is a cover. Cass whispers I love you, John, to John Lennon during the track, and in the future, John would be sure to tell her that, of course, he loves her too. This album is a pure joy from beginning to end, and if you enjoy any of the singles off of this album, it should definitely be in your record collection. This album also includes the standout tracks Straight Shooter and Go Where You Wanna Go. Rock and roll photographer Guy Webster took the controversial cover photo of the band crowded together in a bathtub. The toilet in the corner was thought to be taboo at the time, and the cover was withdrawn. Most regions released different versions of the cover that included some type of advertisement on top of the toilet, while some other versions were further cropped in order to hide the fact that they were in a bathroom altogether. During this time, it was clear that Denny and Michelle's relationship had been taken up to the next level, and when it had to stop, Denny took to drinking. Cass was distancing herself, and for a time, John lived with Denny, and Cass and Michelle each had their own places. I feel if this band had released several albums and had money lining their pockets, they likely would have broken up right here. But topping the Billboard charts was an exciting new experience, and they didn't want to give up on the next paycheck. So John was able to keep the band in line. They trusted his genius, and they went into the studio to record their second album, spending many long hours in the studio. John was very abusive to Cass during these sessions, serving her insults about her weight, and making her sing take after take until she passed out because her pride wouldn't let him win. Unfortunately, it was around this time that Michelle was having an affair with Gene Clark from the Byrds. He attended a Mamas and the Papas concert, and Michelle was blatantly flirting with him from the stage. John was aware of the affair and got upset, and he served her with a letter signed by all three members of the band that she was out of the Mamas and the Papas. She was replaced by Lou Adler's girlfriend Jill Gibson, who recorded tracks for the next album in June and July of 1966, posed in photos for the cover, and performed live with the band. The label distributed promotional copies of an album called Cash On Scream On All Fall Down, but Jill didn't have the right chemistry with the band, so Michelle rejoined in August, and Jill Gibson was paid a lump sum for her time. The record label went back to the original album cover, and the self-titled LP that is often referred to as Cass, John, Michelle, Denny was released in September of 1966. It has long been a matter of confusion as to which songs Jill Gibson sings on, and there are many different stories about re-recordings. But it seems Jill recorded backing vocals with all of the members at once, and she says that her voice can be heard on 10 out of the 12 tracks. Dancin' in the Street is one that she definitely does not sing on, and was likely recorded before Michelle was fired. This album contains what is likely my favorite song by the group, Dancing Bear. It's a very unique piece for the band, and the instrumentation, along with the lyrics, really transport you into the surreal and medieval scenery that they sing about. Though I usually listen to albums from front to back, this is one of those rare songs that I might interrupt my listening session to just go back and listen to that song again because I love it that much. But really I enjoy this entire album. Most of the instrumentation is done by members of the Wrecking Crew, and though the vocals are the highlight, I could easily listen to an instrumental version of this album. Some of my favorites are Trip, Stumble, and Fall, the Mama Cass sung standout single Words of Love, and I Saw Her Again, a song inspired by Denny and Michelle's affair. John and Michelle Phillips would try out their marriage on and off, and they went back to living together in their mansion in Laurel Canyon, where they would throw big parties. Cass wanted to have a child and became pregnant, but kept the identity of the father a secret. Cass's daughter Owen wouldn't be delivered until April 26 of 1967, but the pregnancy, which had not been addressed to the public, inspired the title for the band's third album. Deliver came out earlier in 1967 and peaked at number 2 on the charts. They once again utilized the talents of the Wrecking Crew, and again it is a joy all the way through. It definitely feels similar to the previous 2 albums while bringing us some fantastic new songs. Some standouts include Look Through My Window, Dedicated to the One I Love, and the humorous song about the band's beginnings, Creek Alley. Another one of my favorites is the Rodgers and Hart composition, Sing for Your Supper, with Cass on lead vocals singing about singing to make ends meet. Though I love the classic version of My Girl by The Temptations, I may actually prefer the Mamas and the Papas version that appears on this record, and I really like the instrumental track Frustration, and though in context it doesn't feel out of place, I still kind of wonder why there are actually 2 instrumental tracks on this album by a vocal group. The other instrumental is a 1-minute music box ending with a voice calling for a waiter, and the closing of a door being the last thing we hear on this record. A tribute to the legendary songwriting duo Rodgers and Hart was broadcast on ABC on March 2nd of 1967. The Mamas and the Papas had recorded a version of Glad to Be Unhappy, a song from one of their musicals. They performed it on the show and released it as their only single that doesn't appear on any of their albums. John Phillips and Lou Adler became majorly involved with putting together the first ever Monterey Pop Festival. They used the song San Francisco, Be Sure to Wear Some Flowers in Your Hair in promotions for the event. The song was written by John Phillips, but he gave it to his friend Scott McKenzie to propel him to worldwide success. Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Otis Redding, Ravi Shankar, The Who, and more played at the festival, with the Mamas and the Papas topping the bill. While most studios still used a 4-track recording system, John Phillips created a state-of-the-art studio in his attic so that he could work on his own terms. Apparently that included such perfectionism that the band spent 1 month trying to record just one song. The band decided to try to mend some of their wounds and get some new inspiration together. They decided to take a long trip to an island again and play some shows in Europe. Unfortunately, multiple men took advantage of Cass during her life, and one that would come and go to leech off of her often was named Pick Dawson. He was a wanted man for being involved with international drug trade and also got Cass addicted to heroin around this time. When the North Americans arrived in Europe, Cass was taken to London to be questioned about her involvement with Pick Dawson. They were able to arrest her because the last time she was there, she gave Pick Dawson the money to pay for the hotel that she stayed at, but he didn't pay for the room, and she stole a couple of blankets, and this was of course enough to take her in for questioning. Cass was eventually released with no scars on her record, but the band cancelled all of their upcoming shows, and they went to a party with a bunch of the British rock stars. Cass was telling the Rolling Stones about her recent arrest, and John Phillips walked over and said, "Nah, Mick, she's got it all wrong." Cass cursed him out and stormed out of the room. The band returned to the States and were able to push through completing their 4th album, The Papas and the Mamas, which was released May of 1968. There is a good amount of variety on this album, and John sings lead vocals for the first time on Meditation Mama. Truly it's a decent album, but at least from my own experience, I felt like I was hearing some of these songs for the first time while researching this video, and I know I've listened to these albums throughout my life. That impression tells me that some of these songs are just kind of forgettable. Though of course I have to admit that I'm going to lean towards the first 3 albums when I do decide to listen to this band. Those early days had shown the world a new sound, but this album just falls short of keeping up with the constantly innovative and complex sounds coming out of the late 60s. For the Love of Ivy sounds most like a classic track by this band to me, and Midnight Voyage has an excellent chorus and is sung by Mama Cass. There are a couple of tracks that embrace a more progressive arrangement and moments that fall into psychedelic rock, like heard on songs like Mansions and Gemini Child. The real gem on this record is the group's cover of Dream a Little Dream of Me, with Cass on leads. And the most successful single was 12:30, which had previously been released way back in August 1967 and only made it to number 20 on the US charts. It was clear to many that this band had internally drifted, and the singles and album weren't doing nearly as well as the band's previous releases. So against John's will, the decision was made to release Dream a Little Dream of Me under the name Mama Cass with the Mamas and the Papas, with Midnight Voyage as the B-side. In other regions, the single was simply released under the name Mama Cass, and this proved the potential of her career as a solo artist. In early 1969, the band officially broke up. They were dismissed from their contract, but they would still owe one more album to Dunhill Records. In contrast to the months in the studio recording the Papas and the Mamas, Cass Elliot's debut album was recorded in no more than 10 working days and was released October 19, 1968 under the name Mama Cass, though later she would reject the name and go by Cass Elliot. In January of 1970, John Phillips released his debut album, John the Wolf King of L.A., and he and Lou Adler produced a 1970 comedy film called Brewster McCloud. Denny Doherty released a solo album at the end of 1970 called What You Gonna Do, and Michelle took some time off to raise her and John's daughter Chynna, who was born February 12, 1968. Her and John got a divorce in 1969. In order to be done with their contract and just put this all behind them, The Mamas and the Papas released their final album in November of 1971, People Like Us. Michelle helped write the track I Wanna Be a Star, in which she sings about wanting to become an actress, but other than that, this album was entirely written by John Phillips and is their only album with no cover songs. I feel like a lot of people believe that because this album was made for contractual obligations that there is simply no merit to it. But honestly, I actually thought it was a little bit more entertaining than the fourth album. Also, the bassist on this album, Tony Newton, really kills it. I can take in this entire album solely listening to the soulful bass. I feel like the band had started to leave behind the fast-paced sunshine pop on their previous album with a lack of an idea on where the band was actually going, but this album has more of a soul and soft rock feel to it and seems more purposeful and focused. It's no California Dreamin', but take it for what it is, it's still enjoyable. Another valid reason why people do not like this album very much is because Cass Elliot was sick during the sessions and is not very prominent. Other than a couple of solo lines on the song dedicated to Janis Joplin, Pearl, Cass does not sing any lead vocals on this album. The most notable tracks on this LP are probably Snow Queen of Texas and Blueberries for Breakfast. The only single from this album, Step Out, which I think is one of the weaker songs on the album, made it to number 81 on the charts, and the album itself only made it to number 84. If you guys request it, I can do videos in detail on what these guys did after the breakup of the Mamas and the Papas, but what we know, of course, is that Michelle did get into acting, and all of them released at least one solo album. The most successful of them, Cass Elliot, would unfortunately die of heart failure at Harry Nilsson's London flat on July 29th of 1974. Michelle and John's daughter, Chynna Phillips, has a YouTube channel you can check out, and in one of her recent videos, she has an interview with Cass's daughter, Owen, who clarifies the fact that it was Cass's management who had made the story about her choking on a ham sandwich so that it wouldn't be tied in with the drugs that almost all of their clientele were doing. John Phillips is not exactly the American hero, and his autobiography is absolutely fascinating. But to skip ahead a little bit, in the early 80s he was undergoing rehab for heroin, and during this time he started putting together the new Mamas and the Papas, with Denny Doherty, his daughter Mackenzie, and Elaine McFarlane, or Spanky, from Spanky and Our Gang. This band toured the world, but John and his daughter continued to drink and use other drugs, leading to some disastrous shows. In 1987, Denny would leave the band, and Scott McKenzie would take his place. The 90s saw all kinds of lineup shifts. Laurie Beebe Lewis, who had performed with the Buckinghams, would sometimes fill in for Mackenzie Phillips, and eventually joined the band after Mackenzie left in 1991. John left the band for a few years, so Denny came back to make up for that. Then Spanky left, Laurie left, other girls were brought in, and Barry McGuire joined them at the end of the 90s. In 2010, a compilation album was released under the name John Phillips, called Many Mamas, Many Papas, with demos of original material recorded during the 80s, as well as live performances from the early 80s. I haven't been able to find a copy of this album, but likely the most notable track is the original version of Kokomo, a song that the Beach Boys had taken to number 1 on the Billboard charts just 2 weeks before I was born in November of 1988. The original group was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1998, and a couple of years later, Fox bought the rights to make their story into a feature film, though we haven't seen one yet. John Phillips died of heart failure at the age of 65 on March 18, 2001. After complications from a surgery, Denny Doherty unfortunately left us on January 19th of 2006 at the age of 66. Michelle is still healthy and warm in California, and you can follow her daughter Chynna here on YouTube to learn more about the family, including the mystery of Owen's father. Spoiler alert, it's just some guy, you know. If you're looking for where to get started with this band, of course the first album or some of the singles off of it are definitely the way to go, and if you want to keep going after that, just keep going on to the second album and the third album. This band is a tremendous joy to visit. I will have links down below to some suggested listening, as well as some of the books where you can really dive into this story. Some of the interesting stories that I didn't mention in this video include Cass proposing to Denny, her experimental attempts at losing weight, John suing the record label, and his involvement with the Manson family and one of Michelle's affairs almost getting John killed. Another story I definitely did not want to verbally mention is what Mackenzie Phillips has to say about her father in her memoirs. So take that implication for what you will. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to click the like button, subscribe for more, click the bell icon so that way you get notified when I release a video, and I have a lot of interesting videos. You can check out some of my videos right here. Click this one, or this one. Click one of these videos right here, right now. Do it, please. Thank you. I very much appreciate you.